As we all tune into the media and we see a world that is troubled by wars, and we wonder what will happen next, I'd like to share with you some of my background and the importance of appreciating where we live and how important all the things are around us, and how sometimes what we tend to do is take things for granted. When I was born in 1940 in Holland, my parents lived in a beautiful part of Holland, northeastern Holland, about 20 minutes from the German border. Everything was great. They were in love and obviously had a family, were happy, building a career, and were dreaming about what the world would look like as a family, and it was, relatively speaking, a beautiful world. And then what happened is the Second World War broke out. The German armies in a blitzkrieg, which meant they overran Holland in April of 1945. My dad had been called then into the Dutch army, and the whole world for them changed. The last time they heard from him was in about April of 1945, when he was last seen in the bombing of Rotterdam, where hundreds and thousands of people died when the German armies bombed Rotterdam in order to force the Dutch army to give in. It would take 5 years before we found out if he was still alive. I have still a memory from the time that I was 3.5 to 4 years old, that already the Allied forces had landed and were already starting to bomb the German cities, in particular the ones that had war-related infrastructure. And bombers would come overhead, hundreds of them, from 1943 forward, daytime and nighttime bombing. And the sound of 300 to 350 bombers in the air and listening to it is an eerie feeling. I can still feel the sound of it and realize the sound of it. Obviously, I will never hear anything again like that. There is nothing like it. And what my mom would do, we would go outside on a flat deck behind our house, not to watch the planes overhead, but rather for fear of bombs coming down or planes crashing, that she would feel safer outside with the kids than inside. And in a distance, we were only 20 minutes away from the German border. We could see cities burning, like Bremerhaven, Bremen, Kiel, and then far in the distance, Hamburg, and the whole northeastern part or western part of Germany that touched on the access to the North Sea. People had no food, no fuel to heat their houses, and so we as kids in the morning would get up and with my brother and sister, we would have gunny bags and we would go into the railroad yards and we pick up anything burnable or edible. I remember even from that day forward, and still remember today, is that the feeling of hunger that stays with you, and then the cold of there have only been one little heater in a small room. That's the only thing they could heat, and that we were sitting around it, close around it, but still feeling that cold, that kind of stays with you as well. And then the feeling of anxiety, because all there was is the mother. for young people in particular that go through the period like that, that even as 4 to 5 years old in that area, you will remember those periods of anxiety and the fear of losing that one parent, the only one that was there for you. On April the 12th, 1945, we were liberated by the Canadian Army. We were close to the border with Germany. The Canadian Army had landed at Normandy and then pushed its way up through Belgium, through Holland, and the west side of Holland in particular, pushed them all the way through North Holland, South Holland, and up into province Friesland, and then into the province Groningen, and just before they went across the border. So by then, the German army knew already that they were on the verge of being defeated. I still remember then that the Germans were blowing up all the bridges behind them, and we had a bridge right in front of our house. And I still remember laying in the basement in the crawl space with a pillow on either side of my head when they blew up the bridge. When the Canadian Army came in, and as they pushed the German Army further back into Germany, a small section of the Canadian Army Red Cross was left behind, right behind our house. And in the mornings we would go down there and they would feed us bread with cheese and butter, and the cheese and the butter was bigger than the bread, and it was unbelievable, and chocolates, and we would communicate with them, and although we didn't speak the language, but really we did. And it made such an impression on me that I always knew from that point forward I would go to Canada, to the land of my heroes, to bring attention at this critical moment in time, in the time that we should remember on the Remembrance Day, the 11th S2, remembering that the people that were lost and the immense adverse effect it has on a population and on the people that were part of it, and the children in particular, that it is not a question of that the war is over one day and then all of a sudden things go back to normal. It simply doesn't. It goes on in some cases for one generation and sometimes longer than that. So the reason that I feel always the need to talk about this is that, especially as we are getting closer to the 11th of November and Remembrance Day, that the 2 minutes of silence is very important, because we will remember them that fought and that were lost during the war, and at the same time we will appreciate more as to what do we have and how unfortunate we are, and not taking all things for granted. Wars are destructive for generations to come, and we should be thinking about it and then appreciating what we have, our families, our communities, and then at the same time be compassionate to those that become victims or that are in the middle of wars, and their lives will never be the same again. Remember how fortunate we are. Be appreciative of being a Canadian. Also remember that Canada, sometimes we think of ourselves, I'm a Canadian now, as we really don't have much influence. We do, around the world, we're part of NATO, and we're part of protecting the world.